Hi everyone and welcome to the last video of December. I hope you have had a wonderful Christmas together with near and dear, family, friends, or whatever you've chosen to do. My Christmas hasn't exactly been very Christmassy. I have been moving houses, so on Christmas Day we were driving a van load and a half up from the west coast up back to Nelson where we live now. So that was a way of spending Christmas, I guess. So I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to record for this last video, whether I was going to talk about self-love or something else. But I thought self-love is something that is kind of bleeding into every single video that I'm doing. So I figured that boundaries might be a really good topic actually. And the reason I chose boundaries is that so many of us think that we have lots of boundaries in our lives when in reality we don't. So what we do have is threats, and often empty threats, which is almost even worse. And this is so detrimental to our relationships. You won't be taken seriously if you are threatening someone and then they do whatever it is that you don't want them to do and you're not following through on that threat, for example. And they're not going to be respecting your boundaries. In fact, if you are not willing to follow through on that threat, they're going to know that it's just an empty threat. And they're not going to care about that at all. And besides, just having a threat in place is never going to nourish a good relationship. It's just going to increase that gap or space between you and the other party in this relationship. So I want to encourage you to not ever threaten anyone that you want to have a relationship with in any way. And I'm going to explain the difference a little bit later. So before we dive into this, I just want to clarify that boundaries are appropriate when there has been a boundary violation, but you can also have boundaries in your head that you know what you're going to do and what you're okay with and what you're not okay with in your life. So it's appropriate to have a boundary when someone is coming into your emotional or physical space, so your personal space, in a way that you feel is inappropriate. Then you need to set a boundary around that for yourself to protect yourself. This is always about you and never about the other person. So it's something that you do out of love for yourself. Here we come back to the self-love again, to protect yourself. Yeah. So it's never ever about controlling someone else's behavior. That is not appropriate, and that is when it's turning into a threat. So a boundary is all about an action that you will take if your personal space is being violated. Okay? So it could be something like you telling someone, if you shout at me, I will leave this room. You could also say, if you shout at me, I'm going to shout back. That could be a boundary, but it's not going to be very useful. It's not going to do any good. If you're two people just shouting at each other, you're never going to get anywhere. So we want to have a boundary that is serving you, that is protecting you. So if someone is shouting at you and you don't like that, you don't want them to shout in your face, you have the right to leave the room. You're not telling them what to do. You're telling them what you will do if they behave that way. They can still shout as much as they like, but what will happen is that it has a consequence, and the consequence is that you will leave the room. And it could be that now when you've been away for Christmas, and you might make an exception, but say that in your family you don't do sweets or any kind of treats. You're trying to keep your children away from that. Maybe they get a birthday cake, maybe they get to have a little bit of chocolate at Christmas or whatever that could be. But you are going to visit your parents, for example, or your partner's parents, and they want to give your kids lots of treats every time, even when it's not Christmas. So you could say that if you keep giving my children sweets, we will not come visit anymore. That is an appropriate boundary. Or if my kids are going to eat a lot of sweets when they're here, we will not be visiting anymore. That's even less threatening. And then we can take it a step further. We can get into abuse. If you hit me, I will call the police, I will leave you, I will never see you or speak to you again. Those kind of things. But one thing that you need to keep in mind is whatever action you decide that you're going to take as a result for someone violating your boundary, you need to be prepared to follow through. If you don't follow through, you're never going to be taken seriously. They're going to keep doing what they're doing because they know that there is no consequence. So there is no reason for them to change the behavior, or they're not going to get the bad consequence that they're not wanting to get. So most people probably don't need a lot of boundaries, to be fair. But sometimes they're necessary. And likewise, it's sometimes necessary to tell people or inform people about your boundaries, because not everyone understands that you have this boundary. When it comes to abuse, for example, it might be that we as a society have more of a boundary around that because it's not an acceptable behavior because you're hurting someone. But when it comes to other things, like don't give my kids sweets, most people might not resonate with that. They might not understand that. And they think that they're making your kids happy by giving them sweets. So in their heads, there's no need for a boundary. And in those cases, you probably would need to tell people that you have a boundary around that. So I wouldn't recommend that if you start dating someone and on the first date, you are listing your boundaries and say, if you do this, if you do that, then I'm going to do this and that. That's definitely not necessary. But sometimes it is necessary to inform the other party. And you will obviously have to be the judge of whether it is or not. And one thing I want to say as well is that boundary violations are often an effect of us not taking care of ourselves and therefore not protecting our boundaries. So rather than acknowledging and taking responsibility for what has happened, we want to blame the other person. So let's say, take the mother-in-law example, for example. You go over to your mother-in-law with your kids and she's giving them lots of sweets whenever you're visiting, but you have never been very clear about what the rules are, and therefore you can't really blame her. She's just trying to be nice. But every time you leave, you're furious because she keeps giving them treats and you don't want her to do that. But if you haven't said anything to her directly and she keeps doing it, you may start just being really resentful and you will blame her for everything, but in reality, it's really on you because you have not had a boundary around this. You have just had a thought that you don't want that to happen, but you have never told her or you never thought about what the consequences are. So what you should have said or done would have been something like, hey, we don't do sweets in our family, so I would really appreciate if you didn't give them any when we're here. And if she would have done it anyway, you could have said it again, like, hey, we don't do sweets in our family. If they are going to get a lot of sweets every time we're here, then we will not be visiting anymore. That is a boundary. You're not threatening her. You're not trying to force her to change her behavior. You're just telling her what will happen if she continues to do that. Yep. So the boundary needs to be set with love and respect for yourself, and you need to be prepared to follow through on the action no matter what. So if you tell her that if you keep doing that, then we will not come visit anymore, you need to be prepared to not visit again if she does it again. Okay? So you don't have to be upset about her continuing her behavior. It's all down to you to decide what you want to do, but just think through the consequence when you're setting a boundary. Think through whether you are prepared to follow through or not. Because sometimes it's really easy to say, oh, we're not going to come visiting, and then maybe your partner wants to go visit anyway and wants to take the kids, and you're going to have an argument. So just, make sure that you are prepared to follow through no matter what. And please don't confuse that with a threat, because a threat would be something like, you are probably quite angry, you go in and you tell her that you can't feed my children sweets again, stop doing that, they need a grandmother who is looking out for them and their well-being. So if you don't stop, we're never going to come visit you again. That is more of a threat. But what you're saying now is that if this is going to continue, if they're going to get sweets every time they're here, unfortunately, we will not come visit because I'm trying to protect my children and I don't want them to be fed sweets. Obviously, when they grow up, they will be in charge of themselves and they can go and visit grandma if they like. But as long as they're small, they're your responsibility and part of your personal space. So you may think that there isn't a lot of difference between a threat and a boundary, but when you require that someone else behaves in a different way, it's always a threat. Whereas a boundary is always just about you and what you will do if they continue to behave the way they have behaved, okay? So a boundary allows for them to continue doing whatever it is that they are doing, but it will have a consequence. And that is up to you what that consequence is. So I would like you to have a little think about where in your life people are behaving in a way that you don't like. And then think about whether they are interfering with your personal space in any way, or maybe they're just behaving in a way that you think isn't okay, but it has absolutely nothing to do with you. And in that case, you will have to let it go because they are grown-ups, they're adults, they are allowed to do exactly what they want and it's none of your business. But if they're in your personal space, it is your business, and that's when it's appropriate to have a boundary. And just a little word of caution. If you want better relationships, you need to be willing to sacrifice the short-term relationship when we're talking about boundaries. So if you have never had boundaries and all of a sudden you start setting boundaries about a lot of things, like you can't do this, you can't do that because then I will do this and that and that, then people are going to start thinking, they're probably going to be quite upset, most people are, because it has never been an issue in the past. So why would it be an issue now? Someone comes visit you day in, day out, whenever they want to. You're always opening the door. You're always annoyed that they are there because you have other things that you need to do. You could set the boundary around that and say, hey, I love spending time with you, but not when I'm working, and can you just, send me a text message and ask if it's okay before you come by, for example. If you don't, I'm not going to open the door. And they will have to be okay with that because that's the consequence. They can come to your house, but you're not going to let them in unless they have already texted you and got an okay from you. That it's okay to come over. So that's also an appropriate boundary, that maybe you have some friends that just like coming over constantly and you never get anything done. So you need to be prepared to follow through on that action and not open the door whenever they're there until they learn to respect your boundaries. They're probably going to be pissed off because it's never been an issue in the past and it's going to be annoying, it's not convenient for them, but you're going to feel so much better. So in the end, what you're going to end up with is probably a bunch of relationships where you are true to yourself and you are living with integrity, and people are going to notice that. So they will know that when you say something, you really mean it. They will know where they have you. They will know that if you say yes to something, you really mean yes. You aren't just doing something because you think that that is what they want you to do. And that, in my opinion, is really, really important. There is nothing worse than people who say yes to everything, and you know that they do this, and then they go sulk behind your back because they really didn't want to do it, or even worse, when they go and tell others that you somehow forced them to do XYZ. When in reality, you just ask them, hey, do you want to come and do this? Or do you want to help me with that? And they say yes, that's on them. But if you can live with integrity and you say, no, I don't want to do that, I don't have time to do it, I need to take care of myself, that's fine. So you can have a boundary there that you are taking care of yourself, and people's nagging, for example, doesn't matter. If you nag at me to help me with if you nag at me to help you with something, I will ignore that you're nagging at me. It's not going to help, for example, because often we feel really pressurized to go and help them. So you need to have boundaries in your life, and this isn't a boundary that you need to tell them about. You can just have that for yourself, that no matter what, I'm going to make sure that I'm prioritizing and I'm following my priorities, and I take care of them first. So please don't be that person that just says yes to everything. So I might come across as rude or selfish. I don't know if those are good words to describe it, but I'm sure I do at times, because I speak my mind. I'm not holding back. I'm trying to live my life in a very honest way, so I'm not going to go and say things that I don't mean. And also, if someone is asking me, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? I have no problem saying no when I don't. Because life is precious and I want to spend my life doing things that I enjoy doing. I don't want to spend my life trying to please other people. So some people don't like this about me, and that's fine. But at least those who know me, they know that when I'm in, I'm 100% in. If I say yes because I want to do it. And there's never any doubt about why I'm doing it. It's because I want to. So they never have to feel this awkward feeling of, oh, she's here, but I kind of forced her and I'm not really sure if she wants to do this. It doesn't feel good. They know that if I'm there, I'm going to do my best to have a good time. I'm going to do it because I want to, and I'm going to enjoy the company, because that's what life is about, I think. So that was pretty much all I had for you this month, and I'm going to be back in January, and I'm thinking about spending January, I haven't actually decided quite yet, talking about goal setting and goals in general, and this fits really good in with a guest speaker I will have on, who's going to talk about the responsibility process. And I don't actually know a lot about what he's going to talk about, and that's kind of the whole thing. He wants it to be a bit of a surprise so that I can ask him questions live, or whether we do it recorded, and he will get a chance to just explain it. So I will be as clueless as you, but it will be interesting. So thank you so much for watching, and if you like my videos, I would be very grateful if you could give this video a thumbs up, and also hit that subscribe button and subscribe to the channel and help it grow. So I will see you again in January. Take care.